Shalom, we're continuing our special project with Gesher, Ami, and the Diaspora Ministry, connecting to our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. We are now marking Holocaust Day as we say Shalom to Shani Farchi Luria, head of the pedagogy section of the Yad Vashem International Institute for Holocaust Education.
Hi.
And Shalom to Orly Barnett, education director for the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Center.
Shalom, lovely to be with you all.
Thank you for joining us. Tell us, please, about how these days are used to focus on telling the story of the Holocaust in your region.
So thank you very much for having me. Yom HaShoah is a very important date in the Cape Town and South African Jewish community calendar. We feel very united with Jews around the world as we commemorate the Holocaust, as we commemorate this year the 82nd anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And of course, this year is also 80 years since the end of World War II and the liberation of the camps across Poland, Europe, and the rest of Germany. So we feel like it is a very important date for us this year. In previous years, we've connected Yom HaShoah with other important dates. So, for example, last year, we highlighted that it was 80 years since the deportation of the Jews of Rhodes, as well as the Jews of Hungary towards the end of World War II. And in this respect, we usually connect to our living survivors in the South African Jewish community and connect to survivors who come from these regions.
Shani, the official ceremonies of the Holocaust Day take place in Yad Vashem. But tell us what's happening in addition to all these ceremonies on this day and the days before.
I think today, in a way, this day is a platform for having meaningful discussions about the Holocaust. It's not as if we introduce a new concept. Anybody who grew up here in Israel, I think it's true for every Jew in the world. Everybody knows about the Holocaust. But the question is, when do we have an opportunity to actually stop our routine life and give a deeper thought or in-depth conversation and discussion about the meaning of the Holocaust for us today, not only remembering what happened in the past, but having this, we're all about, we just celebrated Pesach. We're all about, Jewish identity is a lot about commemoration and remembrance. And remembrance is always this intensive, meaningful discussion between the past, the present, and the future. And around Yom HaShoah, it's not only around Yom HaShoah, but around Yom HaShoah is a very intensive time in terms of an opportunity. People are interested. It's like it's an opportunity for them to stop a little bit and discuss the meaning of the Holocaust. So we have a lot of very meaningful days for Army staff, starting from privates, and the Chief of Staff was at Yad Vashem this week. And it's not just a ceremony. They every year the Chief of Staff with his staff come to Yad Vashem, and there's a very meaningful Yom Yun. We have a whole full discussion about every year it's a different topic. And we have schools, teachers, educators. Actually, around Yom HaShoah, there's a lot of interest among educators, whether formal or informal, from Israel and abroad, asking for tools and for educational materials so they can have a meaningful discussion with their students, with their staff about the Holocaust. So every year we try and bring a new angle, a new topic that's relevant, whether it's this year it's 80 years for the end of the war, which is a very meaningful topic, and especially this year, talk about returning to life. How do people return to life after the Holocaust? How do they rebuild themselves? We take it for granted in a way. The Holocaust was over and people were liberated, and then they returned to life. They built families. But it's not so obvious. So and there's a lot of meaning behind that. What does it mean to me in today's world as a person living here in Israel, as a Jew? Okay, what does it mean that these people had the power, their inner power? It's not just a physical power. They have the inner power to say, we're not just crawling into our corner and leave us alone because it's really terrible. And how can you expect? It's about who are we? What do we want to be? And not only about ourselves, but also being part of a community again and contributing to the community. The establishment of the State of Israel is a lot. It's not only about the Holocaust survivors, but many Holocaust survivors contributed meaningfully to the establishment of the State of Israel, whether it's the actual fight for independence, and we're, close to Yom HaAtzmaut as well. But it's not only that battle, it's, all along building the country in terms of science and education and community. And in every field, you'll find Holocaust survivors that not only rebuild themselves, but, and had the inner strength to rehabilitate themselves, but also became part of a community. And this year, this is a topic, but every year every topic, and I think Arlie would probably agree with me, every year, any topic is always meaningful because there's so much meaning behind it. And when you focus on, which is what we do in Yad Vashem, we focus on light and darkness, in the darkness. So when we talk about light in the darkness, we don't say the Holocaust was, it's just a little difficult. No, there was a lot of darkness there. But those sparks of light that we find when we talk about the Holocaust, they bring a lot of meaning because commemoration is not just about being sad. Commemoration and remembrance is about looking forward and saying, what do I take from the past, bring it into my present to build a better future for ourselves as a nation.
Now, Orly, when we talk about education, we know that education always needs to adapt. How do you educate about the Holocaust in the digital era?
So I agree that one of the foremost challenges in Holocaust education today remains the fact that we are less and less able to meet survivors in person to tell us their eyewitness testimony, and therefore it does make it harder for learners to connect to the history. Here in South Africa, we really are at the tip of Africa, and for a lot of our students, this history is ancient history. They find it hard to believe that people are still alive in the world who lived at this time. And when we tell them and share with them that there are people alive from this time, they are quite shocked. They see it as something that happened on a different continent to people who are different to them, who look different, who speak differently, who have a different religion. And sometimes that is a very difficult connection to make. Our South African national curriculum is focused on the history of Africa and South Africa. So the question is often, why do we need to learn about the Holocaust? But we are privileged and very fortunate that the Holocaust forms part of the South African mandated history curriculum, particularly for our grade 9 students. So that's 14 to 15-year-olds. Before they have the opportunity to decide to leave school after grade 9 if they would wish. So it is part of their mandated curriculum. That gives us an opportunity at the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Center to host school groups on an almost daily basis, most of whom are not Jewish. We do have Jewish day schools here in Cape Town, but of course they don't come every day. So we have an opportunity to reach out and educate learners and students far beyond the Jewish community, which I see as a great privilege, and to teach them not only about what happened during the Holocaust, but who are Jewish people, who were they before they became victims. I know that Yad Vashem also has a big focus on Jewish life before the Holocaust, as well as Shani mentioned, rebuilding after the Holocaust. How do you endure the pain of survival and rebuild your life? One of the things that we do here in South Africa is we incorporate our own dark past, our own challenging and difficult history, that of apartheid, which was an almost 50-year racial regime, which ended in 1994. We are currently commemorating just past 30 years of democracy in our country. Sometimes we use the Holocaust as a lens to talk about how our own country endured discrimination and racism, and how it was so divisive instead of unifying of a people in one country, and how racism was left unchecked. Of course, these are two very different, vastly different histories, which we don't ever compare. But sometimes it helps our students to reflect on how they are now living in the shadow or the legacy of a racial state, and how they too were affected by racism and need to work on how they build the society that they would like to live in the future, and what kind of behavior they accept in that society, what kind of people they'd like to be in terms of being tolerant, celebrating differences, honoring the fact that we come from different backgrounds, different heritage, and how they would like to bring respect and communication and lack of diversity, but rather unification into our community here.
Shani, Orly mentioned not comparing, and this brings me to the question about comparison between October 7th and the Holocaust.
I think for sure October 7th triggers a lot of things that it triggers Holocaust remembrance. In other words, many events, many things that happen or have similarity to scenes from the Holocaust, to aspects of the Holocaust. Nevertheless, it's very different. The fact that something triggers a memory, triggers an understanding, doesn't mean it's the same. It's not the same thing on many levels. And I think the question is whether the Holocaust and October 7th are the same thing, and the similarities don't make, or the differences rather, don't make this October 7th less of a horrifying event or a meaningful event. I mean, the Holocaust was horrifying, and there were other horrifying events during our history. And I think in terms of commemoration, and it may be, and this is my personal opinion, it may be too early to talk about commemorating October 7th because the events are still taking place. It's not over yet. In order to think of commemoration and remembrance, you need somewhat of a perspective. It's not, a second after an event happened that you know what you want to commemorate, what needs to be remembered, what the meaning of the event is in the greater magnitude than the seconds or the year when it happened. I mean, even the Holocaust wasn't really, or I'd say it took several years until Holocaust commemoration formed into what it is today. And even today, there are things that are constantly changing, whether it's because of the change of generations and the way generations perceive things, whether it's the different tools that we use today, and some of them are questionable. I'm sure maybe Orly will also agree about that we have a lot of questions, what tools are legitimate or not legitimate. I mean, AI is definitely forms a big challenge for us because it's a great tool, but on the other hand, it serves a lot to distortion of Holocaust and misconceptions of the Holocaust and misunderstandings of the Holocaust. So we have a lot of challenges in education, not just because we're in a turning point in terms of the change in generations, or I like the way Orly put it very gently. It's going to be very difficult for many of us in the coming years to meet somebody who actually witnesses the events and remembers them as they were. It wasn't just a baby, or just not just hearing it, secondhand. And I heard somebody today saying, and I think it's a challenge, that maybe the bigger challenge is going to be when nobody will be able to say, but I met somebody that was there. In other words, there won't be any children and grandchildren of people who were there. And then the distance is going to be even greater than it is today. But I think the fact that, Israel went through such a horrific event, life-changing event as a nation, I'm talking right now, not just Israel, I think the Jewish people in the world also. And the triggering to the Holocaust is just makes it maybe even more questionable or more powerful in a way, even though it's not the same kind of event. So for people personally thinking, this clicks a memory, this turns on a memory, this makes it even more unbearable for me, the fact that a mother had to hide in an attic. Yes, it is unbearable that an event like that can happen in today's world, but it's not the same as the Holocaust. And the fact that it's not the same doesn't undermine October 7th, the fact that the Holocaust in magnitude and the extent of it and the length of time, the fact that we didn't have a country, the fact that we did not have an army, the fact that there's so many, ultimate differences that it can't be the same. But nevertheless, it's still pretty horrific, and we can still draw meaning from the Holocaust to understand things. And even if I make the connection to what I said before, it's not that recovering or rebuilding ourselves after October 7th is the same as the Holocaust. It's not. But the idea that after such a tragic event, people had the inner power and the will and the understanding and the will to be part of this nation, that's a meaning that we can take into the circumstances or the struggle we have in today's day, because we look back and we say, who are we? We talk a lot about the fact that as Jewish people, we're a link in a chain of generations. Now, if you look at the Holocaust, and one of my previous roles in Yad Vashem, I was in charge of the diaspora department, working with Jewish educators around the world. One of the things I used to emphasize to educators, if our Jewish identity is going to be only about how horrible the Holocaust was, and we're part of a generation that was haunted in the Holocaust, that had no rights to live in the Holocaust, that doesn't promote positive connection to Jewish identity. It doesn't. But if I say I'm part of a nation, I'm a link in a chain of generations, where people were committed to their identity, where even in the darkest of darkest time, people wanted to be Jewish. They found inner power. They found strength. They were proud of being Jewish. They maintain Jewish identity in the darkest of darkest times. Then that has a positive meaning. I want to be connected to that. I don't want to be connected to a haunted, hated nation. Okay, it's not that we really have a choice, but I'm saying if you talk about education is about a positive outlook at the world, a positive look at your identity. So how do we promote that? Okay, and when looking at October 7th, I'm saying let's look at the Holocaust and say what power, what strength, what meaning can we find in the Holocaust that will help us cope with this difficult time that we're living through right now.
Now, finally, Orly, as we are trying to connect between Israel and diaspora, what do you think needs to be done these days to strengthen the connection?
So that is a really good question, and I think it's something that the answers might be evolving over time. Israel has always played a very, very significant role in South African Jewry. Zionism has been a pivotal pillar of so many of our youth movements, our community centers, our synagogues, our Jewish day schools. And so we actually learn about Israel, Israeli culture, and Jewish history, even up to biblical history, from a very young age. And we learn Hebrew and we learn the songs, and we all feel very, very connected to the state of Israel, even though some of us have never been there. I've had the privilege of living in Israel, and I was surprised to find out, which might not be actually a surprise, that of course Israelis don't know so much about our communities because it's not part of their Jewish education to learn about diaspora communities, for example, in South Africa. So, of course, there's also a connection between Israelis who've moved to South Africa and South Africans who've moved to Israel and made Aliyah and contributed to the growing of the country. So I think that there is a lot to talk about and a lot to connect on. I think that we both have very beautiful and diverse countries with a lot of multiculturalism, a lot of difficult history, a lot of rebuilding, a lot of focus on human rights and on free speech and on freedom of religion. These are all things that we can connect on. And I think it's important that even in these very difficult times, Israelis know that they are supported by Jewish diaspora communities around the world. And in fact, here in South Africa, we have a lot of communities who are not Jewish who are also supporting the state of Israel. Despite all the politics, despite government elections and factions and so on, we remain steadfast in our commitment to supporting the Jewish people of Israel and Israelis and Jews around the world. And of course, we invite Jews and Israelis alike to come and visit us here on the tip of Africa, and we would love to host them at the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Center on our community campus, where we also have a synagogue and the Jewish History Museum, kosher restaurants and so on. So we hope to forge further community connections in the future.
Shani Farchi Luria, Orly Barnett, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.